They might talk about humor, music, film, books, football and box sets, exercise and maybe even food, trivia and sport, politics and health, sometimes well-being too. On the Life with Brian. On the Life with Brian.
Coming up on Life with Brian.
I was 9 years old and he said, "Don't you want to watch the Avengers or whatever was on?" I said, no, I want to watch News at 10. I had charts of troop movements of, the Golan Heights and the Sinai. So they had a guy on the winning line with a cat up his jumper. So he wrote animal welfare. Maybe worried about this, but the cat's faster than the dog.
Hello and welcome to Life with Brian, the Brian McLeod podcast, for our first show of 2026 as we enter our sixth year of doing this thing. The former Celtic and Manchester United goal-scoring great Brian McLeod is here as always, while the ever-reliable Matthew Christ and myself, Mark Godfrey, are here to provide the assists. Are you both okay?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, happy new year, as much late as it is, but we're going into our sixth year in this month, aren't we? February. That was when we started this whole thing with Pat Nevin 5 years ago this month.
Yeah, indeed. As has been the case since that second show we did with Pat Nevin, that we launched back in 2021, we're joined by a special guest. We're delighted to welcome an acclaimed broadcaster who has brought us some of the biggest headlines and breaking news stories over the past 3 decades or so for ITN, the BBC, and most recently Sky News, as well as hosting the much-loved quiz show Eggheads. He now brings us his experience to the mic as host of his own podcast, Legends of the News. It's a big hello to Dermot Murnaghan. How are you, Dermot?
I'm great, and hello to you all. Thanks very much indeed for having me on. I'm thrilled, and I didn't realise I was the first victim of the new year.
Yeah, we kept you primed and ready over Christmas, and we've let you
may be saying victim at the end of this podcast. There's a couple of things that these two have got lined up, So.
Yeah, don't give too much away, Brian. Well, as is customary, we always let Brian open the proceedings, so we'll carry on as we started all those years ago.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Dermot, for taking the time to appear on our little show. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'm always intrigued by people's interest and experiences in football. I know that you were, I believe, because I can't check everything that's on the World Wide Web with regards to facts and fiction, but I think you were born in Devon, but you were brought up mainly in Northern Ireland, in Armagh, and the wonderfully named Hollywood. As a kid, did you play football on the streets of Armagh, or I don't know if they have streets in Hollywood? They're more like boulevards, is it not? The same as that?
Yeah.
Anywhere else, or did you play at primary school, St Malachy's, I think that was?
That's right. Yeah, you've done your research, Brian. Yeah, no. So yeah, I did play football. You got it on the streets in Armagh. I mean, I was a very young kid when we moved there. I was born and brought up for the first few years in England, and my dad was from Northern Ireland, so he very, very cleverly moved us back there in the mid-60s, just before all the troubles kicked off, by which stage I had a broad English accent, kind of accent. My mother, I mean, you know this, given where you're from and who you've played for. My mother was a Protestant and he was a Catholic, so we moved back into this rather febrile, developing situation, which I had obviously, no idea what was going on. And yeah, we played, I mean, to get to your point, we played a lot of football on the streets, and it was, across the barriers, so to speak. I played football with whoever was around. We played, until out in the street, stopped for cars going by, jumpers for goalposts, all the old cliches, and stopped when our mothers called us in for our tea, and then went back out again.
And at that time when you were playing, were you a football player? Did you imagine you were a football player, or different football players? Because certainly I did when I was a probably the same age playing out in the street, you know. So,
Yeah.
were you a particular footballer or several different footballers, or?
Yeah, no, I was, well, I was brought up then, played the football in the era of George Best. So, everyone was George Best except for me, because I knew I was basically a clogger, and stayed that way. And and maybe seeds there of the contrarian I became. So everyone else playing was George Best. I was Terry Neal. We all had to pick a Northern Ireland footballer. I was Terry Neal. For those that don't remember, the great Terry Neal played for Arsenal rather unexcitingly. I think as a fullback, went on to manage Arsenal, and then went across the barrier to Tottenham. But I remember them just going, why are you Terry Neal? I said, well, look what I'm doing here. You're all dribbling around, and I'm chopping you down.
So is that where this love of Arsenal came from then? Was it Arsenal in the family, or where did that come from?
Back to the origins of it all. And, this was the 60s. My big brother, it's weird, but, it happens throughout Ireland. You support a local club or whatever, and you follow Gaelic football, you follow whatever, rugby. But you also have a football/soccer team. And as I say, all my mates, it was all... as Brian says, they're St. Malachy's. I think it was all male. There were 36 of us, and 35 of them were Man United supporters. So that led me to go for Arsenal, the Terry Neal link I mentioned. But my brother supported Leeds United. And so I remember there was the 1968 League Cup final. And so, Man United were about to be in the European Cup, and Arsenal were playing Leeds in the League's Cup final. So I went for Arsenal. I said, right, they're going to, or some, I don't know if you remember the game, it's seared in my memory. Leeds beat Arsenal. Arsenal got back in the League Cup the next year and then lost to third division, Swindon Town.
That answers my question. I thought I was going to accuse you of being a glory hunter after the 1971 season, but obviously you were well established by then.
No, I was absolutely dyed in the wool by then. After the double of that year, I always remember my mother buying me for my Christmas present one of those, like an airline bag, hangs over your double wheels. I remember going to school with it, as I say, surrounded by the Manchester United fans, Brian. Looking down as I walked into school on that.
Yeah, you had the kid in Scotland. Yeah. In Scotland, we were always nobody would buy Rangers or Celtic strips. No parents, reasonable parents, would buy Rangers or Celtic kits. You always get, in particular the earliest times. I remember the kit was maybe Umbro, but certainly when Admiral came out, and all the teams had Admiral kit, and I asked for a particular Admiral kit. I can't remember which team. Might have been Leeds, because that was one of the ones at the time. Might be United, but I ended up with I don't know why they got this one, but I ended up with Southampton away.
Oh, that's a collector's item.
Yeah, I would have been now a yellow one, yeah. So it was like, but the same kind of thing. You wanted to be the same as all the other kids, they had Leeds or Man United or all the big clubs. But mine was sort of a bit like your bag, I'm running around with Southampton.
I wonder how many kids grew up as fans because of that, because they had a hand-me-down shirt or a Gola sports bag. It seems to be the thing of that era was whatever you were given, whether it was a pencil case or some kind of sports merchandise, but they stuck with it. So you could have been, you ended up playing for your boyhood club United, Brian, but you could have been playing at the Dell.
Yeah, it's just it's always amused me that, as if my mother was choosing to do it deliberately,
Well, for all the geeks that remember, you did make your United debut at the Dell, in 87.
Yeah. So, can you remember your first game at Highbury, Dermot?
Do you know I do? Because obviously I couldn't go. I was a long way away, and very little televised football. But I had an aunt who lived in London, and I think around about 1972, when I was old enough to travel on my own, my mother shipped me out there during the summer, and managed to get a ticket to Highbury. And all I can remember is, it was the double winning team. I just remember being near the touchline and the brilliant Georgie Armstrong running up and down there, late great George Armstrong. And just been mesmerised by his wing play. I should say by that stage, I went to a grammar school in Northern Ireland, which played rugby. So my footballing days were more or less over. But luckily, the clogging that I developed playing football stood me in good stead for rugby.
I was looking up that secondary school you were at, and I was going to ask you a question about that because I know that it wasn't a football school; it was rugby, cricket, golf as well. But they have quite a decent fencing team. And I was just wondering if you had a little go at that,
Have they? Well, they didn't in my day. No.
It just intrigued me, that.
Yeah. There was rugby, hockey, not golf or whatever. And I know what you're alluding to there. And I listened for years after I developed my television career at Sullivan Upper School. Great school, I should say. So many brilliant things about it from my perspective and many, many others. But for many years, I would be like, I suppose, the favoured alumni, building my career, and I get rung up, go and do prize days, give a little speech, nothing like that, telling the kids this is the way to do it, boys and girls. And then, of course, this golfer came along. I never heard of it. Having Rory McIlroy. Who? What? Yeah. I mean, come on. So, yeah, I've been eclipsed.
You've been usurped now, have you?
Definitely. I hear he's doing okay, but
And when you were at school, then obviously you must have been decent at the artist subjects, and you went on to decided to go to. I don't know if you decided to go or you applied to several universities. Did you apply to lots of different places, or did you only go for one particular thing because you wanted to go to Sussex and study history, or can you remember what was in your head at the time? And did you have aspirations then to be a journalist?
I wanted to study history. I was obsessed by history. I mean, I just loved it, and I still do. And the two are absolutely cheek by jowl. I mean, given how long I've been doing the old journalism for, a lot of it is history. I keep seeing documentaries which seem to be, more and more recent, from 2, 3, 4 years ago. But I've had 40 years of doing it, so that's gone. Partly why I'm doing the podcast about the old legends of news that I used to work with and admire. But to answer your question directly, the reason I ended up at Sussex University, very good university for history, that excited me. But it was also the circumstances in Northern Ireland for a teenager in 1976 when I left, height of the Troubles.
Yeah,
I literally drew a line from Hollywood, which is near Belfast, to the furthest point which had a university within the United Kingdom that I could get to get.
Wow.
Sussex University on the coast, and the fools let me in. That was it. And it wasn't a blighted teenage years. It was, everyone adapted to it, and we had a great time. Yeah. Loads of friends, across the sectarian divides. But it was just weird, we never saw any bands. No one would travel there. You just evolved this, this lifestyle of always walking home a different way, letting people know where you, over your shoulder, arranging lifts very carefully, not getting into strangers' cars. I mean, it was just, and it was commonplace. When I first came.
Yeah, but it was normal for you, wasn't it? That
it's what you grew up with. When I first came to England,
you're jumping in all different people's cars, were you?
Yeah. So I just remember
you're hitchhiking all the way around to get a different experience.
I used to hitchhike from Stranraer to, used to get the ferry over from Larne and hitchhike from Stranraer to save the money down to Brighton. So it was great. I loved all that. But I remember going to the shops with my first girlfriend at Sussex University. Took me into Brighton, and I walked into whatever it was, CNA, whatever, just put my arms up. I'd be frisked.
Can I say I've been to Hollywood a few times, and it's a very, it's a very nice area, but you still had that sort of impact in your life, did you? With the Troubles, because it was just surrounding you everywhere you went, I guess.
Yeah, well, Hollywood was and is. I mean, it's even more. I mean, it's very she now. It was pretty much then. It's a satellite, a middle class satellite of Belfast. It had a very nice school there in Sullivan Upper School, very desirable, still is. But I mean, during the Troubles, they had the old drums full of concrete up to block off the street. It was early pedestrianisation, low traffic zones, but a couple of car bombs, nothing like a lot of other cities had in Northern Ireland. But and a few people disappeared. But we regarded it as in Hollywood as we could hear the gunfire from across Belfast Lough, happening in Belfast, and sometimes see the explosions. But we regarded ourselves as not really part of it. I mean, it did and does contain the Palace Barracks, which is one of the major barracks in Northern Ireland, where I remember in 1971 when internment came in, sitting in my back garden during the summer and just hearing the helicopters non-stop flying in as they were lifting people and, whacking them into what became Long Kesh, internment without trial. And, just those memories have come back to me. And that's part of why I became very aware of news, current affairs, situations, and indeed tolerance, which we'll talk more about.
But that leads me in perfectly to what I was going to say. I mean, we're going to talk about your brilliant Legends of News podcast in a moment, but for anyone that's listened to it, you with your guests, you take them right back to where it began and their passions, and you've started to allude to that. Where was this burning passion to work in the news? Where did it come from?
I think circumstances, there's the nature and nurture argument, isn't there? I mean, nature-wise, in terms of my parents, not much of an influence there. They had papers, and it's always a weird mix, isn't it? I always remember on Sundays they used to get the Observer and the Sunday Express, I think, which was a big paper then. I did used to read them, and I remember, it's kind of weird the way it happened. I remember in 1967 when News at 10. The legendary News at 10 first started. It was an experiment that ITV tried to fill a gap during the summer. And I made my dad let me stay up and watch it, 10 o'clock. I was 9 years old, and he said, well, don't you want to watch The Avengers or whatever was on? I said, no, I want to watch News at 10. And I don't know why. And I used to keep charts of, there was the 6-Day War in 1967. I remember my mother, when she died, I was going through some of the old school books she kept, and there it was. I'd had charts of troop movements of, the Golan Heights and the Sinai, and I was 9 years old. So I was clearly interested. I don't know why, but it's
interesting that you just saying there. You're a few 4 or 5 years older than me, 6 years older than me, but my recollection of watching the news is the same thing. My dad would come home from work and always watch the news on probably BBC, the early news on BBC. And you'd have things like that going on, all these different things. And at that time, probably the time I remember was the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And from my recollection, and maybe similar to 60, well, there was some real graphic stuff they used to show. In fact, there's a tank firing something, and then you'd see the explosion and you would see body parts flying all over the part. The same with stuff in Vietnam. I remember stuff going, this is a bit, you get a really good feeling of what it must have been like. You can't feel the heat and all the other things that you experience if you've ever been to that part of the world. But certainly from a news point of view, and it looked as if the journalists were basically one step behind these people while they're in conflict, and clearly it's not anything like that now. It's not as much like that. But I just remember it being like, whoa, that was quite thrilling watching the news, really, as a kid. Yeah. Because you're, like you say, you're in your own little environment. You never really went anywhere. We might have went to Glasgow on the train, and we might went for a day out, some run in the car somewhere, but you didn't go very far. So everything else was about, and my dad actually, I don't know why, but he used to buy the Daily Express every day. That's the paper he read.
Yeah, I think it was only on Sundays.
Yeah,
the Express was a mighty, mighty organ for many decades. Huge numbers of foreign correspondence. The way it's fallen away is, it's almost I'm sorry to say this, but it's almost an irrelevance now when it comes to the newspaper world. But then, and ideologically, you didn't really notice the, whichever line it was taking, if it was reporting, particularly, as you're saying there, Brian, on foreign affairs. And I should say, I think, you make a good point about Vietnam and the access that journalists got there. And many, real legends were there. And I've never been a war correspondent. I mean, the things they did, I've interviewed them. And photographers, Don McCullin, I was privileged to interview recently. He took all the, those photographs that everyone remembers, the girl with half her skin burnt off her, running down a road with napalm going off behind. The execution of a suspected Viet Cong a prisoner they've captured on the streets of Saigon, I think it was, by one of the South Vietnamese army folks. But the thing is about journalism there was the Americans had no idea about controlling them. They had almost unfettered access.
Yeah.
Everybody since then has learned the lessons there that, that in their view, I think the Americans decided that's what thwarted us carrying out that conflict the way we wanted to, which was more or less about body count. They just wanted to kill as many Vietnamese as possible. But, kept getting reported. The My Lai massacre, if people remember that. I mean, total cover-up, and I'm sure they've happened before and since. Total cover-up by the US military, exposed by journalists who were then, dumped on. But since then, I think all nations that prosecute, anti-insurgencies in particular, look at the 2 Gulf Wars that occurred later. Journalists are very, very closely controlled, and we get to Gaza now and they're not even allowed in because the militaries know that they will expose things that you don't want to be exposed.
I guess Dermot, if you're collecting records of military action and news events from the age of 9, there was only really one pathway for you in life. So the classic of that era, I don't know if it still happens, but trying to get the foot in the door. What was your foot in the door moment?
Well, my foot in the door was, as I say, I never became a war correspondent. And I just, quite frankly, never had the guts for it. Interested, but thought, wow, there's far, far better people at that than me. In terms of getting into journalism, I did my history degree, loved it, tinkered for a while with going down the academic route, started a PhD, at which I was absolutely rubbish because, it was so boring. It really was. Sitting in a library trying to write, 100,000 words on some arcane part of 19th century social history. I can put a podcast on that. But then I saw this journalism course going at City University in London, applied, they let me in, said, what's your journalism? And I thought, I have no history of it. So I was interested in, and still am, in greyhound racing. Don't know where that came from. Loved the greyhound. So I went around all the greyhound tracks in London, which there were quite a few back then in the 80s, and wrote this colour piece about, dog racing and just the characters, interviewed a few characters, threw that into the course, and they let me in. Said, this is good stuff, you can write. And I haven't written about dog racing since.
Just as well, there's not much of it around anymore.
There was plenty of tricking going on then, wasn't there, in dog racing?
There really was. I mean, some of the characters, I remember, there was this lot who became known as the Superglue gang, because I think I'm going to get this wrong, but I think what they'd done was they'd switched a dog, painted it a different colour or something, and ran it at a track, and it was a good dog, and they called it something else, and it won all its money. And of course, Ladbrokes in particular refused to pay out, having found, I think, it was raining or something, and the dye started to come off the dog afterwards. They refused to pay out. The Superglue gang then went round every Ladbrokes in Britain, I think, and started supergluing the locks. So the manager would come up and it couldn't open. So they ended up employing teams of locksmiths, and I got to talk to one of them on anonymity, and I just spent my whole time just laughing. What is going on? And they described another plot they'd done. They went to one of the dog tracks in East London, and they'd heavily backed this favourite, but they had a fallback plan. So they got so much money on it that as it's running, If it started to lose its slip, I think it got bumped on the first bend, which is nothing you can do about it. You might be the best dog in the world, but if you're into dog racing, you'll know. If you get a whack and get put out wide, you're not going to come back on the races. And it got a whack, so they had a guy on the winning line with a cat up his jumper. So he animal welfare maybe worried about this, but the cat's faster than the dog. So the cat obviously runs like a scalded cat across the track to get safety, and the dogs will veer off the track, follow the cat, and the race is declared null and void, and they get their money back. Great story. Yeah.
So you could have been a sports journalist, I'm guessing. Had things been different?
Yeah, proper rogues.
So we were just saying that, just to finish off the sort of the foot in the door moment. What was it? What was your moment where you thought, right, this is it. I've cracked it now. I've made it into the news world.
I think everyone's got imposter syndrome. I don't know, in a certain sense, you think, oh, they'll find me out one day because if I keep writing stories like that, they never will. No, I just learned it. I learned a trade. I did my shorthand, got up to 120 words a minute, did the court reporting. I got a job from that course on the Coventry Evening Telegraph, which was then a muscular regional kind of three edition a day, I think, paper with a pink section on the Saturdays, real hard knocks. Went in there as one of their first graduate trainees, and they knocked the spots off me. I remember going in and saying, this was Coventry in the early 80s, so big West Midlands town, Thatcherism's kicking the hell out of the economy, and is a bit still a car town, so big redundancies. And I went into to edit the picture story. I said, listen, the bond market is going mad, which is an indicator then of, the economy, blah, blah, blah. And he just looked at me and he went, listen, mate, the only bonds the people of Coventry are interested in are either called James, Priam, or maybe Basildon. Now, fuck off.
You're listening to Life with Brian.
We had two semi-naked ladies with whips dressed in leather, and whilst that might have appealed to people, the two openly gay singers did not.
He said, you can't play football, but you're going to love this. So he handed me this season ticket, and we got relegated.
So I'm just glancing down at the monitor, which was between us, but then, of course, the eye line of the camera, which was on the wide of the studio, without the monitor in shot, looks like I was there having a good look. Ugh.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Your career spanned that era of newsroom, and then, I'm guessing local press, and then you've obviously worked your way up to national news. So you've gone through a period there of digital, and then 24/7 rolling news, and now social media. And do you think that's made the job harder or easier for anyone trying to follow in your footsteps?
It's kind of both, isn't it? Harder in terms of making money, definitely. Easier in terms of access. Look at us lot. Anyone can do a podcast now. The cost of entry is very low. Back in the 80s, 90s, you had to get a job, and there were narrower opportunities. One of the big employers, really, really competitive. They're still there, but they're ailing and trying to address the digital world, the social media world. And it's easier to get into, but monetizing it, if you're going to put bread on your table, I don't know how you do it. And more difficult then from those that are doing it in terms of accessing material and assessing it. AI has only really been having an impact in the last 2 or 3 years. But the content then, content in terms of social media was, let's say, it's been available for the last 15 or even 20 years. Somehow it was difficult but easy to assess, i.e., there wasn't a bot making it up, or, maybe there was a human one, but now it's just instant, and they're very good. You can fake voices, you can fake faces, you can fake incidents. So verification is hugely difficult to work out, what is going on. But I will, let's speak up for all the organisations I've ever worked for. Trusted sources, I think, will and are bouncing back. They're holding up remarkably well because, there is a certain desire for people, A, to do that verification, and B, to tell you in this confusing world what these professionals think are the most important stories in the world or in your country right now. There's too much chaff out there. They sort it all out for you. Nothing wrong with it. I would say this, wouldn't I? There's nothing wrong with a television bulletin that goes, these are the top 5 headlines. We know what we're telling you. Have a listen to this. And I just want to add there, for all the conspiracy theorists out there is no agenda. Not any newsroom I've ever worked in is there an agenda. None at all.
Well, on that vein, what about the emergence of newer channels like GB News, alongside the continued prominence of outlets like Fox News? How do you see the future of TV news evolving, particularly around impartiality and opinion-led broadcasting?
I think part of the problem is what they call themselves. It's broadcasting and opinions, fine. Everyone has opinions. This whole idea that there's a perfect impartial kind of way of reporting news is, to my mind, rubbish. I always had opinions whenever I was interviewing anyone, right, left, middle, centre, whatever, and quite enjoyed arguing against what I personally thought myself. These channels and others, many more like it, you have a certain pathway that you're going to follow by and large. And somehow it's not news, it's discussion. I think maybe they shouldn't be called Fox News or GB News or whatever. It's related to current affairs. It's opinion. I mean, I'm totally anti-regulation of any of it. I have the old-fashioned view that people are grown-ups. And you look at me and Brian at the age of 9 years old, you can make up your own mind. Yeah, you get influenced, but, I'm not going to listen to or watch a particular channel and turn into, a right-wing or a left-wing ideologue because of what I hear there. Quite often, I think I'm a great admirer, as you know, of news readers, real and unreal. And, there's this great film called Network with Peter Finch playing Howard Beale, who, I don't know if you remember it, he goes mad and he leans out his window and they try to sack him, the network. I mean, it's well worth a watch. And he leans out his window in New York and, no, he goes on TV, he uses his so-called last broadcast to tell the people of New York to open their windows, lean out the window and shout, I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore, which they all do. And you think, in reality, if I was on the news and I said, rise up, ye masses of the United Kingdom, march upon Downing Street with, burning crosses and pitchforks and eject the Prime Minister of the day, they would do it. No, they'd look at the screen and go, he's totally off his rocker. I watch it, but hey, it's not influencing one way or the other, which what I think.
I heard you talk. A good way to finish your broadcasting career, was it not, to say that or take a quote from the film that you did? So I like the idea of what you just said.
Yeah, no, I didn't go for Network. I went for Anchorman, another.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I mean, that's close to documentary, I can tell you sometimes.
Yeah.
I think I heard you talking to, was it Adam Bolton, about a similar thing on your podcast about how, people are looking at things like Fox News and GB News, and it's sort of almost shoehorning in opinion, and it might be damaging the sort of regular news channels that like Sky and ITN and what have you, that I would put yourself as part of. And I think that's the issue, that the boundaries are getting blurred slightly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because of what they're called. I mean, Adam takes a stronger line than me on it in terms of the regulation. He thinks that Ofcom, the media regulator, the broadcast regulator here in the United Kingdom, should. I mean, and he has said in the past, that they should crack down hard on GB News. I don't think so. And there are others as well, perhaps more niche. I really don't. Because, I don't know why. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I'm too trusting. But I actually do think that I'd go back to what I said. I think people make up their own minds. these are tiny influences upon them, really. They're kind of entertainment. Look at the way most people watch television. And, this goes before we all had phones, where more or less people, certainly I do it myself, everyone I know does it. You watch live TV, so to speak, but you still have your phone there. And you may be, there's a boring bit or the ads come on and you're looking at scrolling, or you're texting or tweeting or whatever someone about it. But even before that, before we had that, you were ironing or cooking or doing other things. Television, you don't just sit there swallowing it up. Which I think
it's a very great point you're making there, Dermot, but with regards to our generation, that would include me and you and whatever the younger ones, but the generation before me, like my parents and other people, they take the GB News, which they sit there and watch and absorb all day long, in partnership with the Mail, for example, and the Mail on Sunday, and they take all of that in, and that becomes factual to them. So when you're sitting talking to some 70 to 80-year-olds, they're saying, no, but it's on GB News. So it must be true, because they grew up when TV would have started in the 50s and all that, right through the straight, this is the news. What you're talking about when we first started watching it, 67 News at 10 and all that. But now, because it is GB News, they believe this,
I take.
And I've only got small 2 or 3 examples of all that, but they're all 70 plus.
Yeah. No, I take your point, but I also think it's circular. I think, and it goes for politics as well nowadays, in that you feed back to people what they already think, and their influence is a myriad. They're not just from a channel, or a newspaper that addresses them in that way, and they. Let's look at the world of politics now. What you get is not any party that I can see that is led by ideology. Now, ideology can be a very bad thing, but, you used to know that you had left, right, whatever, and they had a program which they wanted to follow, and you elected them and they did it. Now what you get is a party that is totally focus grouped up, responds to the, minute by minute changes in opinion, as they define it, of their core electorate, and does what they think they want. We seem to have lost, when it comes to politics, that ability of politicians to say, look, we have a representative democracy, you elect us. To my view, it's too long a gap, but you elect us once every 5 years, and then we do on your behalf what we think is right, because you elected us. And then when we come to the next election, you tell us if we did the right thing. It doesn't work like that anymore.
I just did want to ask, regardless of the platform we're talking about, who we're talking about, whether we're writing, whether it's TV or anything related to that, over the last 12 months, the pace and scale of major stories has been relentless. As someone who's covered news for as many decades as you have, Dermot, have you ever known anything quite like this?
No, good question. Really not. And for 10 years, more or less. In a way, obviously I got old. And your time, you have to make way, you have to move on, and there are other things you want to do. Wonderful world, front row seat at the making of history and all those cliches. But the last 10 years, basically, 26 now, 2016, the EU referendum. Before that, there was, of course, the Scottish independence referendum, where things went a bit mad in terms of journalism and the partisan nature of debate and the relentless pressure upon you. And things, I'd spent 10 years in a washing machine, tumble dryer, whatever you want to call it, just thinking every year, maybe we'll have a quiet year. But if you think about it, so we had 14, the independence referendum, 16 Brexit, 17 a general election, 18, 19 madness in Parliament of Theresa May not being able to get anything through, of nightly votes, it seemed, on what deal, the backstop, and all these weird things that people have forgotten about. 2019, another election, bit of COVID thrown in for a couple of years, and then we get, the Queen dies during that. Then we get another. By the end of that, I can say, in terms of my personal career, I thought, yeah, you've pretty much done everything you wanted to do. You've got to stop sometimes. So it kind of came to a natural conclusion for me about 3 years ago.
But even in the last few weeks and months, I mean, we were talking sort of the end of last year about you joining us on the podcast. So we were putting some notes together, and in that time, it's gone from Trump to Greenland, now Epstein files and Starmer, and I mean, if it wasn't for rolling news and social media, you wonder how we would have covered all this news. Because if you think back to your era on television, when you had a sort of nightly bulletin when you first started and daily newspapers, this just wouldn't have been a way of keeping up. This news would have been 2 days old by the time it came out.
Yeah, right. And people didn't pay much attention to the news. That's why then they would gather, in the evenings for the 6 o'clock and the 10 o'clock bulletins. And, the biggest audiences for any news bulletin were always, I'm not sure it's the case now, were always on a Sunday night, because people had switched off and they thought, I better plug back in again. Now it is just constant, because you've got a, mobile phone, personal computer with you, and you're getting pinged all the time. But also because events are, quite literally mad. We don't seem to be able to have a prime minister for more than 2 years. I mean, I very much doubt, as this time of recording, that Keir Starmer will last 2 years. What is going on? Trump, from the journalist's point of view, the gift that never stops giving, because every word he says, every conference he gives, you cover it now. If you think for the intervening 4 years of Joe Biden, if Joe Biden went to give a speech to a bunch of veterans in Omaha, you wouldn't waste your time covering it. Now, everywhere Trump goes and opens his gob, you're there, because he's going to say something. Something's going to happen here that, and it's not irrelevant because of who he is and what he represents. And they might actually do it. Could you imagine if just a year ago we were talking about the possibility of the United States invading Greenland? I mean, that's one of those stories that I still can't get my head around. It is quite literally mad.
Yeah.
You host the hugely popular Legends of News podcast, which reunites you with some of the biggest names in broadcasting. Was this a project you'd always wanted to do, or did it just evolve naturally from conversations you were already having?
Yeah, no, I suppose it was something I always wanted to do, because way back to what I discussed there about, the first original News at 10, I was really privileged that I got a job then, 14 years after, or 24 years after watching that at ITN. And I remember I crossed over for about 3-4 months with Sir Alistair Burnett, who'd done one of the original broadcasts of News at 10. He invited me into his office. He was, quite old then and quite keen on the odd snifter or two. His office at 11 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and offered me 2 fingers of the finest malt that I've ever had, and we drank our way through probably half a bottle, and he was, working that evening, and I just remember sitting there going, I'm sitting here with Burnett. Sadly, I mean, so many people have forgotten about him, but he was the founder of, real proper, the muscular News at 10 that it then was. He bestrode the globe. Trevor McDonald took over from him, and everyone forgot poor Sir Alistair, who's now sadly no longer with us. But I just have that appreciation. When I was at university, again, another forgotten name, Reggie Bosanquet.
He was popped in my head there.
It was absolutely, he was the Ron Burgundy of our time. Used to, wear cravats and get absolutely. He said he never got squiffy, but had a few looseners before he went on air and all kinds of things. And he wore something to enhance his hair, which every now and again didn't get its saucer of milk and went a bit sideways. why, I've always loved it. So I ended up doing it, and I thought, well, look, they're all still there, most of them. Those two I've mentioned have gone, but they're all still there. Trevor's, I had a lovely chat with Trevor. I worked with him, but, there's so much to discuss. I'm going to have him back because he barely scratched the surface with what Trevor has achieved. Julia Somerville, the list goes on. There's so many others that I want to talk to, because you will never see those days again. News at 10 used to get audiences, 15, 16 million, up to 20 million on a big event. Now, they get 2 million, maybe that. I don't know what the figures are, but they're lucky to get a few million, even with big events around. And these are people that have seen things, and they've got knowledge. We don't just talk about the old past. We're not just, going, oh, do you remember interviewing Margaret Thatcher? Because they've got perspective. What goes around comes around differently. But real John Simpson I talked to, amazing guy, still working. One of my definitions for the podcast is kind of, perhaps not full time anymore, but the stories they can tell, the perspective they have is amazing.
Of all the people you've interviewed over the years on the show, who stands out as truly unforgettable?
On the show, well, I can't pick them out because they all tell different stories, and we've only been going a year, so it hasn't been. Can I broaden that out, Mark? And all the people I've interviewed in the 40 years I've been doing it. So many remarkable people, including one who I'm sure has passed away. And I will say it was total privilege. It was a survivor. I think she was the survivor who was closest to the epicenter of the Hiroshima bomb. So on the 50th anniversary, I was lucky enough to, which was 95, I was lucky enough to be sitting in the Peace Park in Hiroshima. And if you've never been, put it on your list. Go to Japan, of course, but go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And sat there with this woman, by which stage old, crippled with multiple cancers from the radiation she'd suffered. She'd been, within 100 meters of the epicenter of the blast, and due to the nature of the way the eddies go, she'd survived. And, thousands of people nearby had just been vaporized. There's a wall they have in the Peace Museum there of the outline of a person in ash who'd been just round the corner from her. And I tell you, talking to someone like that for an hour with an interpreter, she made me these peace cranes they have. There's thousands of them in the park. She gave me one. Tears, that's the only time I've cried. Tears were pouring down my cheeks, just listening to, and I wouldn't even count myself as very spiritual, but just tales of forgiveness. The survival's remarkable, but to go through that and to put to her, what do you think about Americans? What do you think about gaijin like me or whatever? Nothing, just peace, peace, peace. Remarkable and such a privilege.
Just something you mentioned there about the crazy world we're living in. I just thought, and I haven't mentioned that we were going to say this, but is there anyone right now that, with all the experience you've had of interviewing people, that you'd be chomping at the bit to, don't let me put words in your mouth, but someone like Donald Trump, if, I know he's not a legend of news, but if somebody offered him up to you on the podcast, would you snap him up?
I think I might have to broaden the categories. You have to almost follow him every minute he's exposed to a microphone. But no, I wouldn't actually, because it's like trying to nail a jelly to the wall. He just tells lies.
Legends of fake news.
Yeah, and then fake news. That news. Then he berates you, and you think, so I, as a reporter, am meant to give them time to talk utter bollocks, am I? And so you interrupt too much, and then, there's so many partisan people who come in and say, oh, you wouldn't let him get a word in edgeways. And in your head, you think, that's because he was talking nonsense, he's connected to Planet Zog. So no, I just think it would be a waste of time. Someone I would like to talk to in current circumstances, the King. I think, interesting guy.
There's nothing happening with the royal family at the moment, is there?
That would be a real coup. There's an endless list of people who would probably never do it. But yeah, I think that.
Do you think though, just what you said there about a couple of things that mentioned earlier, false news, all the other stuff you can see on social media if you choose to pick a particular subject, and there's always been the royal family have always been newsworthy because there's been loads of them have just misbehaved, right? Certainly in our lifetime, right? You could have all the sort of things with Princess Margaret, for example, when I was growing up, so that was her. She was on the front page of the Daily Express nearly all the time, the dad's paper, right? So you go through and continually to do things. But you think that there's at some point, right? So would it be better for the king to just say, right, well, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to explain certain things that have happened recently from his point of view and his perspective, and why why he'd made decisions with regards to the close members of his own family? Do you think that would be better for him? I'm not saying he's unpopular, but it stops a lot of stuff. Then at least he said, "Well, look, this is the situation with Harry. Look, this is the situation with my brother, right, or whatever." So.
Yeah, that's what I'd lead off on. I mean, the situation with his younger brother. What is going on? I don't know the ins and the outs of it, but his so-called punishment seems to be, so he's not called Prince anymore. So he moves from a grace and favour home in Windsor to a grace and favour home in Sandringham. And I like the way, and it's given. They say he's been given a small stipend to maintain a small staff. People who would still work for him. Apparently, some are not volunteering to. And you do think so. That would lead me into, and it's a question. That David Dimbleby, a proper legend who I must get on, had his brother on, who's addressed quite recently, and I think it's only because of the power of who he is, which is, I think we need to be told, where the money comes from and what you do with it. You've got billions upon billions, who paid off Virginia Giuffre? Whose money is that ultimately? And if you
where did it come from?
So you didn't do anything wrong, but you gave her however many million. There's so many questions. And he's the head of that family. Much appreciated, much loved, of course, and constitutionally important. But the stuff in this day and age, we're beyond the humble peasants who think you're descended from God. Just act in a grown-up way with us and tell us where it comes from. There's one story which I think everything's getting blown away by: Epstein, Trump, Starmer, Mandelson as we speak. There's one story come out the other day, these huge dumps of illegal rubbish. They're all around the UK. The ones that are highlighted, there's many more of them. Well, one of them is on Duchy of Lancaster land, owned by the King, and apparently it falls upon them to pay to clean it up. They won't, because the way it works is they don't. They kind of have to, but who's going to make them do it? And they won't. You think, well, other landowners will probably have to do that. And I say you've got a fair bit of wedge, mate. So, chip in at least. And it's horrible eyesore. Not your fault, fully get that. But, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. There are so many questions that I think we as a grown-up 21st century modern democracy and meritocracy, I hope, kind of need to ask this unelected family who, I don't think people will object when I say they're a bit weird and they're a bit too private.
Dermot, I want to move on to your cancer diagnosis, if that's okay. Yeah. You've used your platform to encourage other men to get tested earlier and not to fall through the gaps. Can you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, well, it's prostate cancer. I've been diagnosed late with stage 4, which, as goes for any cancer, if it's caught earlier, they are pretty treatable. There are some that are nasty and still difficult to deal with. But on the big ones that affect hundreds of thousands of people, it goes for all of them. Early diagnosis counts. So when it comes specifically to prostate cancer in men, there's a simple test. It's called a PSA test. If you get one, which I didn't, because just felt totally fine. If you get one when you're allowed to have one, there isn't a mandatory testing program, which again is part of the campaign, but you do have a right to demand one. If you get it early, you catch it early, you can deal with it. I mean, you can either manage it or indeed cure it. But there are just so many great treatments out there for early stage prostate cancer. And just you're very kind to ask, Mark, because it is obviously one of my big issues at the moment is you are, as I said, there's no mandatory testing program, but you have an absolute right once you're over the age of 50 to demand one. And, a lot of people have been in touch with me, who've listened to that message, said, well, I went to my GP, I'm a little bit worried. And they said, you don't need one. Well, you can insist. And listen, let me say this on the podcast, you're not meant to, and I don't want to bung up the NHS, but, you can lie. Well, let's say tell a white lie. If you go to them and say, I've got symptoms, then they will give you a test. Look, it doesn't cost a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time. But if you go, you're a little bit worried, you've been going to the toilet a bit too much in the evening, you thought it was because you'd been to the pub, just go and get a test anyway. And if your GP says no, tell them that. Tell them, I've got some symptoms, and you'll get one. And I don't know what the argument is monetarily, but surely if you catch, if you test 100 people and you catch 2 or 3 who you don't have to treat further down the line with hugely expensive drugs, you've spent the money on those tests, but surely you're going to save money on the diagnostics and treatment further down the line. End of message.
So I think the issue with the PSA test is it's not 100% reliable and anywhere near 100%, possibly not. So I think that's why it isn't out there. So, I mean, because obviously the UK National Screening Committee recently decided it wasn't recommending mass screening. And I think that was based on the fact that it's not a reliable way of doing it, I guess. I mean, I just wonder what you think of that.
Well, 2 things on that. There are more reliable ones being developed, but yes, they do cost more. But there are people like me that, quite frankly, even before you get there, your PSA levels will be way out there. And if they catch them, then they're reliable. It's on the borderline where, they can give you false worry or indeed false hope. Fully get that, get it all together. But, I'd say, what about the halfway house then? People in risk categories, over 50s generally, people with, a history of it. If you've got a father, brother, or even cousin who've developed it, then you're entitled to a test even earlier than the age of 50. And black men, twice as likely as white men to get prostate cancer. Send a letter out. I get letters, and every 2 years I get a bowel cancer screening kit sent to me. I do it all the time. Women get reminders about breast cancer and others. Just do that, and test the vulnerable population.
Yeah, I mean, you did say, Mark said you fell through the gaps. Is that because you initially wanted to go for a test and you couldn't get one, or what was your situation?
I'll tell you why. Because being a TV guy, I was get this, I thought I was lucky enough that if I did an independent production, I would get tested for insurance purposes. Because if you get ill or have a condition, you would screw the production and they'd have to cancel it or whatever, and it cost them money. So I would get tested, and I've done, like you mentioned, a quiz show and documentaries and series over the years, and I would get tested. I'd go to private clinics, put you on a treadmill, test you for blood pressure, heart, dementia, diabetes, whatever. So they'd take blood, and I always thought at the time I'd get the clean bill of health, thinking, "Oh, fine." That's what I thought. So I thought I was getting one. Of course, no PSA test, and then lo and behold, I was on holiday. Felt really bad. Thought it was overindulging on holiday and a long flight, and just got worse and worse, and came to the UK and got diagnosed. This bombshell fell out of the sky on top of me and the family.
Life with Brian, life with Brian, life with Brian.
Meet the new quiz, same as the old quiz. Yes, it's our opportunity to test Chucky and our guests' powers of deduction or pure luck with our regular quiz. In honour of Dermot, who was the erstwhile host of BBC Two tea time quiz show Eggheads, we've called this one Egghead or Smeghead, where you both have to identify which of the following people with egg in their name, current or ex-footballers, and which are just fakers we've thrown in there to bamboozle you. So if you think they're a footy player, then say Egghead. And if you think they're an imposter, say Smeghead. It's 5 alternate goes, just like a penalty shootout. Do you both understand?
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay, Dermot, you're our guest. So you won the toss and go first with Tommy Eglinton.
That's got to be Egghead.
Egghead, yes, you take an early 1-0 lead. Tommy was a star for both Everton and Tranmere Rovers from the late 40s into the early 60s. He is one of several players that effectively played for 2 Ireland teams, the Dublin-based FAI run side and the Northern Ireland-based IFA side in an era just before the 2 nations had their own separate teams. So, as I said, you take an early 1-0 lead.
Yeah, Tommy Eglinton. I mean, that's a classic footballer's name, isn't it? In the 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Second, Brian, you open up with Tommy Eggleston.
Smeghead.
Oh, I know you're thinking. You're thinking there. Oh, he's put one in.
I'm not doing anything. I'm not even thinking it. I'm thinking about the name.
Yeah, you should never think about this.
Thinking about previous answers. I don't get influenced by that.
So you said Smeghead, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, he's fooled you. It's Egghead. It's true. This Tommy,
he's fooled you. You're part of this quiz and all.
Well, I'm always on your side secretly. This Tommy Egg was a fullback for Derby, Leicester, and Watford before he became assistant manager to Harry Catterick at Everton during the successful 60s and 70s period. Managed in Greece and was also a qualified chiropodist. So you're one down, Brian, early on.
Yeah. So your second one, Dermot, is John Leguizamo. Leguizamo.
Okay. I think that's Egghead too. That's Leguizamo. Yeah, it's Spanish or something.
Oh, I tell you what, this is false, I'm afraid. It's a Smeghead. It's likely that everyone here and listening will have seen a movie featuring American actor Leguizamo. He's played major roles in the Ice Age and John Wick movies. He's been in Romeo and Juliet, Carlito's Way, and many, many more. So you failed to capitalize. And back to Brian to see if he can equalize.
Yeah, there's a window of opportunity here for you, Brian. And your next one is Anthony Leggett.
Anthony Leggett. Smeghead.
Yeah. The close your eyes and smack it down the middle worked for you there. It's false. It's Sir Anthony Leggett is a Nobel Prize winning British theoretical physicist who's widely recognised as a world leader in the theory of low temperature physics.
Oh, yeah.
He has shaped the theoretical understanding of normal and superfluid helium liquids and strongly coupled superfluids. Where do you get these from, Mark? He set directions for research in quantum physics of macroscopic dissipative systems and the use of dissipative
Just leave it at that. You don't need to finish it, do we?
No, I couldn't have done this yesterday, could I? If I was
how usually I slip in the foreign ones for Matthew to trip over. Well, this time I decided to put the entire paragraph.
Well, let's just say
he paste out of Wikipedia for him to trip over quantum physics of macroscopic dissipative systems and condensed systems.
Just a guess for me, because I'm a big fan of high temperature physics.
Yeah, I thought you might know this one, but no, whatever he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so one all. And your next one, Dermot, is Andy Legg.
How are you spelling leg?
Legg.
Right, so not with an E. Andy Legg. I mean, yeah, it kind of sounds like I'm going to go Smeghead, but because it's leg, maybe I'll Rabona it. I'll say Egghead.
That was one of the longest run-ups we've ever had.
Yeah, well,
right as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is correct. Yeah, you just changed your mind at the just in time there. Andy was a left back, come left midfielder who played for a host of league clubs, most notably Notts County, Birmingham, Cardiff, and Swansea. He won 6 caps for Wales in the 90s and was on the cover of the computer game FIFA 96 and was recently appointed manager at Barry Town. So you're back in the lead.
Okay. I'm just looking ahead to see if Mark's tripped me up here, but not with the name, certainly. Brian, your third one is John Gregg.
John Gregg?
Yes.
Well, which one?
Well,
it's Gregg.
Oh, fucking hell. Gregg.
Not the Rangers one.
No, because it's EIG. That's why I was asking. Smeghead.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I don't know whether you changed your mind on your run-up, but it is Smeghead. I'm trying to remember if I've ever been in one of these establishments with you, Brian, but you've probably been into one for a sausage roll or a steak bake. Yes. John was the founder of the famous high street bakery chain Greggs, which he set up in Newcastle just before the Second World War. He started his business with just a push bike, delivering his goods to local homes before buying his first van.
Right, so we're 2-2, and we're on to our fourth penalties now. And Dermot, yours is Troy Gregg.
Oh, goodness. Troy. Well, Troy's, yeah, kind of football-y name, and you've taken right. So the other one, founded Gregg. So Troy Gregg. Smeghead.
Ooh, I thought you were going to go Egghead, but you made the right choice. Troy Leon Gregg was a convicted murderer in the US and the first condemned individual whose death sentence was upheld by the US Supreme Court after all previous capital punishment laws in the US were invalidated. He participated in the first successful escape from Reidsville State Prison's death row with 3 other death row inmates in 1980, but was killed later that night during a bar fight.
So when it's your time to go, eh?
Well, I think you imagine you would do after you've been in prison, isn't it? You know?
Exactly, yeah.
Go get pissed and have a fight.
Oh, God.
So your what's that? Is that 3? Yeah, that's 3-2 to Dermot.
Okay. And your fourth one, Brian, your penultimate one, Leon Leg.
Oh. Egghead.
Egghead, yeah. I've never seen you grimace so much on one of these quizzes. But it's worth it because you're right. It's true. Leon is a centre-half who's played extensively in league and non-league football for the likes of Gillingham, Port Vale and Cambridge United. Diagnosed with epilepsy aged 16, he became an advocate for raising awareness of the condition and runs a blog about his experiences called Epilepsy Baller. So
There we go.
3-2, is it?
So we haven't had a tight one for a while now, so this is going right down to the wire. So therefore, Dermot, to put the pressure on Brian, your final one is David Pegg.
Pegg? As in Simon Pegg. Maybe he's his brother.
As in, yeah, same spelling, yeah.
Oh, maybe he's his brother. David Pegg. Sounds like, yeah, off the left peg. Yeah, Egghead.
Oh, yeah.
Egghead, oh, you've done it. Yes, well done. I'm sure Brian knows this one.
Yeah.
Sadly, David was one of the 8 Manchester United players who lost their lives in the Munich air disaster on 6th of February 1958. At 23 years old, he was one of the youngest to perish in the crash, and having already won 1 England cap, he was tipped to succeed Tom Finney as England's outside left. So, Brian's
got a score to win it.
Got a score to draw this one. No, it's to draw.
Oh, is it to draw? Sorry, I've given you false hope.
No
Right.
such thing. Yeah. I never have any hope. No. Quiz.
You finished the quiz shootout with Timothy Leggett.
Smeghead.
Yes. That didn't give yourself any doubts there. You just ran up and smacked it in. Smeghead, false. Timothy Leonard Dalton Leggett is better known under his stage name Timothy Dalton. The Welsh actor and Manchester City fan is well known as being the 4th man to play James Bond on the big screen, having taken the role in the movies The Living Daylights and The License to Kill in the late 1980s.
There you go, 4-all draw. That was a pretty good effort by both of you.
Good quiz.
All day long. I'm on. I mean, drawing at a penalty shootout.
Yeah. We don't do tiebreakers.
We haven't decided.
They've not got enough time to come up with 11 questions.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll have to have a bar fight to sort it out, I think.
And as I mentioned, Dermot, before we let you go, it's time for Focus On, where we dig out old Shoot magazine player profiles of yesteryear and pose some of the questions to our guest. This time, I've got to admit, I struggled to find someone fitting to use their interview until I came across the 1992 feature on Middlesbrough defender Alan Kernaghan. It rhymes with Murnaghan, so I figured that was close enough. So we'll ask you some of his questions. Are you ready?
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Okay. Your full name?
Dermot Murnaghan.
Your birthplace and date?
Birthplace is Barnstable, Devon, 26/12/57, Boxing Day.
What type of car have you got?
Me, I've got a Kia EV. Look at me. I live in North London, for goodness sake.
Well, in 1992...
Just walk it around the place.
In 92, Alan Kernaghan had a Vauxhall Cavalier. Great car. What do you remember about your TV debut?
Oh, my TV debut. Well, I started as a reporter. I remember being absolutely useless, and my producer taking me aside, telling me that, you know, maybe I ought to get myself a skill. Yeah, you know, just if I'm any good at it now.
Alan Kernaghan's answer was that he played against Notts County, and famed hard man Kenny Burns was meant to play but didn't show up. What's been the most embarrassing moment of your career?
I'm interviewing a correspondent from I don't know, the New York Times or something, who was coming on about the American elections, and I mistakenly thought that this was someone who was coming on to talk about artificial insemination. You know, yeah.
Oh dear. Alan Kernaghan's answer wasn't quite as good as that, but his was that he fell on his face in a schoolboy international for Northern Ireland against England. Who is the wackiest person you've met in TV?
Wackiest person? I mean, listen, how long have you got? There's no one in TV who isn't in a way. I think, you know, you've kind of got to be, as you can judge from the while we've spent together. You've got to be, you know, there's something got to be a bit wacky about you, a bit wrong with you. The wackiest person I've met in TV. There's so many. Oh yeah, maybe Bill Oddie. I mean, you know, it kind of goes. Now, Bill, who I remember interviewing him live, you know, he used to do country. What was it, Springwatch or something? From a milking parlour where the cows were elevated behind him to get their, you know, the milking things on, and one of them, this is live, one of them just lifted his tail, her tail, lifted her tail, and you know, golden shower.
Oh dear.
Yeah, well, I didn't have a shower this morning. Now I'm having one. I thought, fair play to you, mate. That's broadcasting, live broadcasting.
Your favourite TV programme?
Do you know what? There's a programme that I'm watching at the moment, not a lot of people have heard of. It's called This Town, made by the BBC, and it's about kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's set in Coventry in the early 1980s, where I got my first job, and it's all about the development of Scar, decline of industry. Brilliant. And at the moment, it's my favourite, but they change all the time. I mean, I think long term, it's got to be something obvious like The Wire or The Sopranos.
Alan Kernaghan, he in 1992, his favourite was Vic Reeves' Big Night Out.
Yeah.
What programme do you immediately turn off?
Oh, yeah. What do I immediately turn off? Pretty much the news.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, you know, I used to be addicted to it, and now, you know, I watch. I'm retired. You know, I watch a quiz show in the afternoon, and come 6 o'clock, the news comes on, and I turn over to another quiz show. Yeah.
And finally, outside TV, who is the most famous person you've met?
The most famous, Joan. Joan, legend, still going strong at whatever age she is. I mean, fair play to her. Me being you know, a London fancy pants, was in a restaurant the other day, and there was Joan, you know, having a lunch with a younger partner, and I thought, God, Joan, you are just amazing. And I interviewed her once and she was lovely. So yeah, and I'm still starstruck.
Or Joan Collins. Well, Alan Kernahan's wasn't quite as famous as that, but he mentioned a guy called Jackie Wright, who was the little guy who was on the Benny Hill show, who happened to be his uncle.
The little bald guy.
Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, and with that, we hand over to the local news wherever you are. I mean, no, sorry. Actually, it's the end of the episode. So, Dermot, it's been brilliant having you on. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dermot.
There's nothing like us guys for enjoying the sound of their own voice. Sorry if I bored you for hours on it.
Oh, no, entertainment.
Oh, no, been brilliant. Thank you.
Great, yeah.
Brian, Matthew, thanks very much as always.
Yeah, thanks,
you,
Dermot. And I will.
Thank you, Matthew.
We'll recommend Dermot's brilliant podcast for anybody who, other than listening to us, wants to find anything to listen to.
Yeah, similar ramblings.
And cheers to you out there for dropping in. Subscribe to Life with Brian on your favourite podcast platform. Follow us on X and Blue Sky at Brian McClare Pod and Instagram at Life with Brian Pod. And remember to come back next time. So we'll see you then.
Life with Brian. Life with Brian. Talking films or music. Life with Brian. Talking TV and food. Life with Brian. Talking trivia and exercise. Life with Brian. It's different every episode. Life with Brian. Talking politics and football. Life with Brian. It's different every episode. Life with Brian. Life with Brian.